Hi, Doug. Thank you for coming on today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you're at today?
Well, thank you for having me on. And a little bit about myself. Well, business wise, I started working at the age of 3 years old for my father's business. I was sweeping floors for 25 cents a week. And I got to buy a lot of candy at the end of the week. So that was really, really cool. Probably not good for my teeth, but and then I worked with my dad, and I was hustling side businesses all the way through until I was about the age of 19. Then I went into the military. And then I always had businesses on the side through the military and different businesses all the way through my life. And eventually, what happened was I went into a medical field and I applied for jobs and I couldn't find one. So I ended up going back into what I used to do, which was selling. And I was selling music equipment at the time, and I was working. It was a great job. I worked with all the bands, Aerosmith, the Eagles, all of those folks. Had a great time. But what I realized is I was making way more money and way more leverage in selling at that point. So I ended up pursuing a career in sales and ended up working for large companies and ended up usually being, one of the top one or two sales reps. I was always building businesses all the way through. And then that eventually led me into working on my own companies and then working with a guy named Chet Holmes, who wrote a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine. And I became Chet's president of training and sales and worked with him and then Tony Robbins and a bunch of other people for about 7 years. And so I've been helping companies expand their revenue ever since because that's what we did there. So I've been doing that for now over 15 years.
Love it. Thank you. And this is exactly why I wanted to have you on today. I was so intrigued by what you do. Backing up a little bit, the challenge in this industry, the natural foods industry, or actually in consumer packaged goods, is typically there's a rinse and repeat strategy. There's a lot of this is what I did last year, so this is what I'm going to do this year without a lot of creativity. I know from my experience, Doug, that one of the most successful accounts or persons that I've ever worked with within that account, he was able to create different strategies and always reinventing things. And as a result, he and I had together huge double digit growth every month, where most CPG brands, if they're lucky, if they get 1 or 2%, we
Hmm.
were doing 30, 40, one quarter we did 82%, huge numbers like that quarter after quarter because we didn't just accept the status quo. So that's why I was so thrilled about when you guys reached out to me is exploring what do you do or how do you help brands, how do you help anyone understand, first of all, how to do that, and secondly, how to get from point A to point B. And let me throw out one other caveat. Well, the cool thing about sales is that when you wake up in the morning, you can, to some degree, decide how much you're going to make, where you can't do that in any other field. So anyhow, please, your thoughts?
No, and I agree with you. I mean, this is one of the reasons. I mean, I was actually making three times more in sales than I was actually working, and my degrees were in nuclear medicine. So you would think, I have a specialty, I can go into the hospital and do really well. But it was crazy. I was making three times more then. I was like, okay. So then I went on to a career in sales, and I made far more than 3x. Right. So I've never looked back in that regard. But how you do this with a company or even an individual that's selling is the first step is you got to get brutally truthful about what do you really want as a goal. Like you said, you can get up every single day and determine what you make, but most people are not very clear on what is that truthful goal, not honest goal, because we all think we want to grow to or whatever. Um, but there are some years that I don't want to grow. I don't want to double this year. I mean, I just had enough stress from doing that the last 3 years, something like that. So everybody has their own individual journey. Somebody always has a bigger boat. And so whatever somebody determines. So getting very truthful, honesty being subjective, truthful being quantitative, right? This is where we're going. This is where we're going to do. That is the first step in this whole process, because if one's not truthful at the end goal, what I found, Dan, is they want to go in this direction, but then what is needed to grow to that point is not supported because they're not committed to the truth. They're committed to the honesty of, I would like to have this happen.
Gotcha. So how do you help someone bridge that gap? I mean, well, let me back up. I understand what you're saying from my experiences and how I've been able to grow and double and do all that. Those they have those huge benchmarks, those huge wins. For someone that doesn't have that wherewithal, how do you first help them identify what they should be thinking about? And then for a team leader, how do you help them identify what they should be thinking about and notice that within the people they're working with? Loaded question, I know.
Yeah, it is, but I mean, it really comes back to goals, right? So in an organization, I'll start with the team leader first. In an organization, most team leaders do not know what the individual goals are of their people. And why? They just never really paid attention to that. They come in, they do they're working tactically. We got something that we got to get done. We're going to get it done, et cetera, et cetera. But there's always, 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 always professional goals and personal goals. And there's always a left brain, right brain, right? I mean, logically, this is what I know I have to do, but right brain, I want to grow and expand. I want to have a better personal life. I want to send my kids to private school, whatever it might be. But team leaders don't generally know that personal attachment to the professional objective. And so that would be the first step. Let's get clear about what are the goals of the people. Now, once you understand what the goals are they achievable? I mean, is it something that can happen? You don't want to leave somebody in a place where, I had a guy who wanted to grow from $3 million to $53 million in a year, and he had no budget whatsoever. And so, that's not highly achievable. And so with high probability, he's not going to achieve that because he needs money to actually start promoting the brand and bringing in new people and doing things. And he just didn't have it in the thing. So we had to get very truthful. So once you understand the goal, the next thing is to gently push back to find out, do they really want it? So let's stay with salespeople because salespeople are fun. It's like they're making, let's say, I don't know, $120,000 in sales. Always the next number is 200 to 250. I mean, it's always one or the other that I hear. So then the question becomes, okay, so if you want to go from there, you essentially want to double your business to 250. All right. Here's the question. If you get to 250, you're going to be really happy. Yes? Yes. What happens if you hit, 170 or 160 or whatever, right? Oh, that'll be fine too, right? They're not committed, right? So we have to gently push back to find out their level of commitment to the actual goal. Now, if they say to you, the right answer that we want to hear, if you will, is, listen, 250 is just a starting point. I really want 500, but we got to get there next year. So how do we do it? Now you have a more committed person.
Love that. I mean, that's great advice because that's something that I don't think a lot of people think about. So let me throw one other caveat at you. In this industry, there's a belief that everything's kind of already set up. Everything's already determined in terms of what your growth is or what you can do. In other words, the rinse and repeat strategy that everyone uses is what this industry uses a lot. In fact, actually, you'll probably get a kick out of this. Will resonate with you. I think it was Paul Harvey was at his son's house, son's house for Thanksgiving. His son's wife was cutting the ends off the ham. He said, "Why do you do that?" She said, "I don't know, because my mom did it." The mom was right there. They said, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "Well, because my pan was too small." The point being is that frames really how this industry looks at things. This is what we do because this is what we do it, without a lot of that creativity. And yet the reality is the customers that you're serving, the retailers that you're serving, they want and need that creativity because that's how they get the competitive advantage. Your retailers and your customers want that because they want the personalization. They want all the benefits that come with knowing that you're there to serve them. Your thoughts? I mean, how do you cross that bridge with someone?
Well, sometimes you can't, and sometimes you can, right? So, there's an old. If they keep doing what they're doing to get to a higher level, many times it doesn't work, right? So, there's a story I once heard about. A man wants to make it to the top of the mountain, so he goes to the side of the river and realizes he's got to cross the river, and so he builds himself a raft out of sticks, logs, whatever, and he finds his way across the river. And then he's at the end of the river edge. He's looking up at the mountain. He's going, well, you know what? I probably ought to bring some of this wood with me because if it gets cold at night, I'm going to have to, put a fire together or shelter or whatever, right? And so he starts making his way up the mountain, and he gets up to the mountain to a certain place, and he spends overnight, and it works fine, et cetera, et cetera. Puts all the wood back on his back, and he starts ascending up the mountain again. Well, now he starts making up halfway, 2/3 up the mountain. And all of this stuff he's carrying on his back is weighing him down where he can't get up the mountain anymore. So what's the lesson? He had to cut loose all of the sticks and rope and everything else that he had in order for him to make it to the rest of the height. And I see what you're saying is very similar. If we keep doing now, by the way, it works, right? So the system works. But if we keep doing the same thing over and over and over, then what ends up happening is it comes down to commoditization at that point. The lack of value that somebody perceives, it's like it just comes down to like a purchasing decision. Okay, how many units, what price, and how quick can you get it here, right? And so purchasing agents are actually rewarded in that matter, but that's not going to spark innovation and the growth, especially for the smaller folks. They that you're talking about, the retailers. Other than the manufacturer, the wholesalers. So even on the wholesale, though, they got to get creative at this point. And let's face it, 2020, it's kind of changed some things for people, right? So innovation is something that people value and they will pay for when it has tangible value to that, or even behavioral value to that, i.e. it changes how somebody can think and act. Therefore, they have a better life. So what I would challenge people to do is really think about, okay, what kind of innovation could I put in there? But a lot of times they don't think that way, Dan, because they've been doing it the same way. We used to have this running joke when I was in the Army. It's, I was in the early 80s, and they used to say, this is not the way we did it in Korea. It's like, wasn't that in the 50s or whatever, right? So it's, we have things now called computers, right? So it's about constantly trying to innovate regardless of the position you're in. And eventually, there are many companies that have been spawned and grown like crazy on innovation.
True. And when you said we were talking about this is not the way we did it in Korea, my first thought was, how did that work out for you? So, because that's really what these brands do, what different companies do, is that they're not thinking about let's be creative. And when you're talking about small disruptive brands that are responsible for all sustainable growth across every category and every channel, etc., they've got to be creative. They've got to be very disruptive. They've got to be very tactical, etc. Where the big brands, they apply those same cookie cutter strategies. And by the way, I love the fact you use commoditized, because that's a term I use about it for everything to describe this, because that's the mold that we need to break out of. So can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by commoditizing, and how does a company look beyond that? I guess the question underneath that, Doug, is what is the possibility? What does infinite look like?
Well, so commoditization happens due to the lack of perceived value. Right. So when we are not, as the selling entity, being able to position value being, the perceived meaning of what they deem to be a benefit or worth to them, then, and that's got to be unique to them. Right. So so we all buy on value, and as the value or worth goes up, the higher the margins, right? Higher the price goes up. So, lack of innovation, for example, is a belief system, and innovation is a belief system. So when people have been entrenched in a certain way, a belief system, hey, the world is flat. You go on, you sail your boat off, you're going to fall off, right? I'm sure there were people who believed that. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And, we know it not to be true. So in the absence of value, there will be commoditization. There was a study I read, gosh, I'm going to date myself now, probably 20 something years ago, which said people buy in the order of this, perception. Number one, it was value. And value is determined by whatever the heck they deem it to be. That was the definition. The second one is service. The next one is selection. Do they have a little bit of variety? The fourth one was convenience, and the fifth one was price. And I was like, man, you know what? I hear price objections all the time, right? So maybe I should try this value thing. Like, what is it, right? So I started studying up on that, and all of a sudden, I go from in that particular company being one of the guys who's selling a lot to a guy who's selling a lot of high margin. And so, where the average sale, we were doing a recurring sale of we do 1 to 5 year contracts. So the average sale was around $1,500. My average sale per client was $3,500. So that got the attention of the executive management pretty quickly. So, but what I was doing is I created massive value perception for people. And it's all within the conversation that it happens. And so if people can think about value as we talk about this, if you can create massive value, you will get higher margins. People will buy from you more often. People will refer you more often.
This is exactly the argument that I've been trying to get out there, trying to challenge the industry. Again, we tend to commoditize things. We fight to the lowest common dollar versus the value. And so, kind of back up a little bit. How to frame. One way I'd frame this is that when you think about a natural organic product, if I eat a generic bread, I'm hungry almost before I finish eating it. If I eat the best mainstream bread, even though it's a lot more expensive, I may be satiated for 3 or 4 hours. However, if you are what you eat and what you eat matters, then if I eat the organic bread and the organic bread has more of the nutrients that my body needs, it's cheaper over time because I eat less of it. It has a lot higher value because I get what I need and I'm not eating a lot of filler junk to fill into it. And yet at the same time, that's where the real benefit is. And my point being that this industry, from my perspective, needs to focus on the value that we're feeding you more effectively. We're giving you the nutrients that your body needs and not all the excess garbage that you don't need that's not going to help you achieve your goals, etc. So when you're talking about the value perception, I love the fact that you're talking about how margin needs to remain high at that point because there's something there. So something there of value. So how do you convince or how do you help people understand how to determine what that value is?
So one of the greatest ways of doing this is monetizing everything.
Okay.
So you talked about, people eating healthier lifestyle, right? You can make a case very easily by looking into some of the medical journals and pulling from, the American Medical Association or Harvard Medical or whatever about what we ingest directly has an impact on our concentration and focus by X percent. So if our conversation, our focus drops by, let's say 20% throughout a day, that means we're 1/5 less productive than we are. So if we look at our company revenues, we can make an argument, logical, that if everybody's 20% less effective and you're doing $10 million, then you, in theory, should be doing $12 million because everybody's eating the wrong stuff. You're losing $2 million a year. So monetization around anything, and higher profits, reduced costs, whatever it might be, you can monetize very easily. But what about the intangible side of it or the personal side of it? Better repute. What does this all lead into for somebody? And we, as the selling entity, the first thing we want to do is we've got to build trust, right? So that we can elicit the value that we want. And that value that I want to elicit needs to be unique to me and unique to the field so that they can relate to it. And so what we want to do is we want to figure out, okay, what's a clear ROI? Let's say on one side of if we drew a double axis graph or whatever, on one side, what's a clear ROI? On the other side, what is the benefit of the behavior change, if you will? And we want to go at that for tangible and intangible benefits. So, a tangible benefit to a lot of the buyers, and by the way, we should only be talking to buyers at this point, right? The buyer has certain levels of responsibilities, aspirations, desires, fears, everything that is there, understanding that buyer you can clearly position into an ROI or some behavioral change or some type of personal gain in the form of gratification or avoidance of pain, right? So as we have these conversations, we're asking questions to elicit these type of things so that we can look for things to actually monetize or at least put into a percentage of growth or a percentage of drop. And we all, as human beings, we love the emotion, right? That's why we love movies, because we get to live in the hero's journey or whatever. But we also justify with logic. And all of us, if we're watching a film, I was just watching one last night on um, a rescue mission in a POW camp in France, during World War II. And we all go, we don't want to be there, right? Because most of us, anyways, the logic says this is dangerous. So we want to keep bouncing the brain between the emotional side and justification with logic. The emotional side, justification with logic. And painting in what is the clear ROI? What are the tangible benefits? What are the intangible benefits? And how are we monetizing this, or at least positioning it so that they can clearly get to the left side of the brain. So it has logic, mathematics, sequencing, some linear thinking, something that makes sense, the facts, if you will.
Great. That's really helpful. I appreciate you going through that. And on that note, when you're talking about fear, that's the underlying thing I think that derails most people. And this is one of the things that I think you probably talk about a lot. How do you help people overcome fear? And what I mean by that, Doug, is well, I know what works. I know what I need to do to keep my job. I don't know what let me rephrase that. A lot of salespeople are so busy keeping their job, they're not thinking about how to really grow the company beyond that, how to really expand and grow, and what that could look like if they really put all their muscle into it. So how would you counsel someone in that position, and or how would you counsel their team leader to help them overcome that fear that is blocking them from going to the next level and well beyond?
So I think there's two different points there. There's definitely the fear, right? The blocks of fear. And then how do we guide people to actually get them to the next step? So, and in defense to salespeople, not, CEOs and owners are probably going to go, no. But in defense to what I'm going to say, for salespeople, many times it's the company that's actually creating that lack of growth atmosphere for their salespeople. A lot of times, in business, we have great months. Sometimes we have average months, and sometimes we have months that are like, I don't know, that wasn't really a good month, right? But the challenge is a lot of CEOs will say, I can't get accurate forecast from my sales team. And then when I look at it, I'm like, well, you have an environment that actually slaps them down for actually providing accurate forecast. So if somebody's not going to hit quota one month, for example, but they've been over quota 6 times in the last 7 months, that 1 month that they're not going to hit quota, everybody's going to go, ooh, you're bad. You what happened with you? Are you in a slump or whatever? No, it might just be the natural occurrence of events, right? So what people will do is they will hyperinflate the numbers to stay safe, which is a form of fear, right? It's a fear. They're trying to avoid the pain of what is going on. So fear in itself is not false evidence appearing real. Fear in itself is fear. It's a real, powerful, very helpful emotion, if you will, while it's being expressed in the right way. So, if we hear we're taking a walk through the woods and we hear a bear growling or something, right? It's probably going to kick up our fear. Like, okay, geez, I'm in grizzly country or whatever, right? I probably should pay attention to this. That's great motivation. And so fear can be used for the positive, and I'm getting into how you train people, right? So it's got to be used for the positive, but there's also that fear that just lets go and is irrational, right? So you're in the woods, you're hearing bears growl all the time, and you see a bear, and you start scurrying up the tree right immediately, right? Now, just imagine the bear could walk over and say and speak English or whatever language that somebody's listening to. And the bear says, hey, have you seen my wife and kids? because I'm lost out here. And every time I get lost out here, my wife thinks I'm off with another bear. And you know, I get myself into trouble. And, the next week of my life is just heck. I don't want to have any problems whatsoever. And you up in the tree could go, oh, yeah, they're over there. Cause I saw them, a little while ago. You have, like three little, little ones. Yeah. Oh, they're over there. Hey, thank you. Have a good day, sir. And, the bear takes off. That's a rational fear, right? Because we're projecting so far into the future that we're pulling it right into the present, and we don't know what the real circumstance is. And this happens all the time in communication, Dan, where people are they're taking the moment, they feel the fear, they go back into the past and they go, okay, looks like a duck, must be a duck, right? And that's serving at times. A bear is a bear, right? So, however, they pull it into the present, and then they start making it all about what the past was, not in the present moment. Or they'll go out to the future and they'll go, oh, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And so now they're creating anxiety and lots of stress for future. And worse yet, they might go back to the future and then go back to the past and pull it all into the center. And now they got overwhelm going on, right? And this is where objections form in sales most of the time. So a fear is nothing more than a discomfort expressed in an emotion. That is an objection. And so if we're going to train people, the first thing we got to do is we got to get to what I call the real it. And the real it is, what is the real reason this person is in fear? Now, a lot of times fears are learned. They're habitual. They come from our past. I remember my oldest daughter, Rebecca, when she was just, 1-2 years old and she learned how to walk, I would hold her hand and she would walk up on very high things. And, some people in my family are like, oh, don't do that. Don't do, like, oh, what if she falls? I'm like, I'm right here. She's not going to fall. Now, that works great because Rebecca is not afraid of heights. I grew up afraid of heights, right? My brother hung me off a roof and dangled me when I was 3 years old. I got an immediate fear of heights at that point. Now, one day we're at the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge and I see I think she was 6-year-old crawling up on the Golden Gate Bridge to stand on the railing so she could see the whales down below. As a father, it's like, oh no, right? So immediate fear, you pull back from the past, right? So I had to now interrupt that process. So the way, and hopefully the people are, how do you train people? This is how you train them, right? You got to let them be. So I walked over very calmly. She was climbing up. I said, sweetheart, can I have permission to talk to you about something? Right. And so we had that conversation. It's like, the reason I don't want you up on this railing is not because you're not capable. It's because we don't have a safety strap and the winds are blowing very hard. And so when we're going to take a risk like this, we want to take a calculated risk if we can do so. Right. So to cross the gap of fear, people have to understand why they're in the fear. Now, in the military, sometimes you're in fear and you cross a gap of fear just because you have to act. So, chaos is sometimes the necessity of invention, right? But for the most part, when we're dealing with what we're dealing with now, they have to understand where the fear comes from, because it's, very easy to say, well, stop doing that behavior. But if you've been doing that behavior most of your life, and when you get a trigger level, immediately the human brain goes research, well, got this in the past. This is what's probably going to happen. And they're off on this fear loop. The way to stop that, Dan, is there's always a feeling, there's always a thought. It's one of the first, or one or the other is a first dominant. So in my case, it's always a feeling. And other people's cases, it's a thought. As soon as you get that thought or that feeling, you got to invite that feeling in and you got to go, hello, friend. I recognize who you are. Let's take a moment to take a look at this, right? And just the act of interrupting the pattern. This comes back from Tony Robbins or neurolinguistic programming. But just interrupting the pattern gives the person now the chance to say, okay, I want to take and go down the left path or the right path. And the left path has not served me very well. I'm going to go down the right path. And the more that person retrains their habitual behavior to continue to go down the right path or the right side of the path, then that person's fear will drop, because every time they do that, they go, oh, well, I didn't get hurt doing this. I didn't get hurt doing that. Right. My uncle was in the tried out for the airborne in the military, and he told me, he said, Doug, they started you at a 2-foot platform. The first thing is you learn how to jump off 2 feet. Then they bring you up to a 5 foot, and then up to a 10. And he said, then they strap you in because it's getting too high. You hurt yourself, with the strap. And he said, you just didn't jump and go right into the airplane and they threw you out of the airplane. So you want to stair step people through their fears, if possible.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And by the way, a huge fan and a student of Anthony Robbins. One of his best stories is about a baby crawling across the counter, falls off the counter onto green carpet, and notices pain. The idea being that the association that green creates pain, not falling. And so love the visual. And as far as helping people stair step into the pain and help them get through that, that's what we need to be doing, obviously. But let me ask you about this. Conversely, you're in a situation where you're going to go into a big sales meeting. It's super important. There's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure on you, and you succeed. So overcoming that fear, that euphoria that makes you think, look, I'm invincible. I accomplished this. God, that's great. And then be able to build on that. How do you help people see what's possible in that realm?
Okay, so I'll answer it this way. I've been doing a lot of work in the training industry, and the number one challenge that people have in the training industry is, what do I do? Right? What do I teach? What do I have? And then, is it safe for me to actually go out and do this? So the key in this thing is, again, you're stair stepping it, right? So if somebody wants to roll out something, let's say they want to be innovative and roll out a new marketing initiative, they don't go, and they're not supposed to anyways, go and put $1 million into that initiative to find out it's not going to work. So just like any reconnaissance, one would want to understand what the market's thinking first. And you can do that most of the time by just talking to the people that you already have as clients, or people that are potential clients, and say, listen, I'm thinking about doing this. Could you give me some candid feedback? I do not want to run down a path enthusiastically for 5 miles and find out I'm in the wrong place. And most people in business, or most people in life, if you just ask for help, will help. So once you understand what that basis of a possibility can be, then you want to test the hypothesis, just like we would do in a science class, right? And how do you test it? Well, you don't go all in. You just test a little piece. So, maybe if it's, I want to, start a new marketing method. Well, okay, try the new marketing method. What does the new marketing method mean? The second thing is to understand that it's always a constant generation of upgrading. What I mean by that is it's never going to be perfect the first time. And quite frankly, it doesn't have to be. Most people are because of the fear of being, rejected or associated or whatever, they don't take that calculated risk that I was talking to my daughter about on the on the bridge. And believe me, that was really high. So when, I was looking down, I'm like, oh no, right? I'm just thankful nobody had a safety strap at that moment, because my heart probably would have jumped out of my chest. But the reality is she's not afraid of that. And the reason she's not afraid of that is because we took little steps all the way through her childhood, and there were times where I was just barely holding on to her fingers over my head. So she was up, 7 feet pretty much. And for somebody who's 1.5 years old, that's a long fall. And like you said, if they fall, they can make an association. Like you said, with, the baby crawled off, fell, hit the ground, green carpet, right? Now they can associate anything to green. Money. So money's the, pain, right? St. Patrick's Day, pain, whatever, right? So it's really powerful how the brain works. But again, we want to stair step through that process and go in small. Test small. Implement large, test small. Once you're safe and then you can up the game a little bit more and test that. Once you're safe, you can up the game a little bit more and test that. Once you're safe, now roll in your funds in a big way. So is this answering the question, Dan?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you getting into that. In fact, actually, one of the questions I really wanted to ask you, in addition to this, nice segue, is how do you help people gain clarity? Because you spend a lot of time talking about that. How do you help them gain clarity around the objective, what's realistic, what's not realistic, and then help step people into realizing and actually exceeding those expectations, those goals?
So again, the first part is you got to get brutally honest, truthful, excuse me, not brutally honest.
Oh,
You got to improve that truthful in the process. And one of the ways we Russ Whitney taught me something. I don't know if you know who Russ is, but Tony used to learn from Russ in some
mm,
capacity. So Russ told me something, which is if you always have business partners that agree, you don't need business partners,
there you go. Yeah.
right? And I thought it was pretty brilliant all the way through my life. I've picked people who had controversial or contrarian point of views so that I can learn. And so in this case, to get clarity, we have to play the same thing. I want to achieve X. Do you really want to achieve X? Right? Why do you want to achieve X? What is the benefit of achieving X? What is the downside? What is the upside? We're gonna push back and make sure that we understand what clarity really is all about. Because stress, I believe anyways, stress comes from two things. Number one, not having clear understanding of what we want to achieve. So lack of clarity is the root of stress. The second part of that is not being able to live in ambiguity. So if we're not clear on where we're going and we're not committed to that, and I guarantee most of the time it's not going to go as planned, then we have to be able to adjust along that path, and that's living in ambiguity. We have to be able to keep our eye on the ball, on the goal we want, take one step a day or one step an hour or whatever it is toward that goal, keep our nose pointed in the direction, and understand that there are going to be days where it's going to snow, it's going to have an ice storm, there'll be an earthquake, there'll be COVID-19, whatever we want to call the thing that's going to happen, but we have to keep our nose in that direction. So once we get clear on that, then we then assess, what do we have now? What do we have? We know we want for objectives, but do we have the ability? Because we have the ability to actually achieve this objective. So we can make a list of objectives, that's fine. But then we want to assess, do we have the ability to actually achieve this goal at this point? Or what else do we need in order to achieve it? And the assessment part is really important. You want to assess the processes that are going on within whatever we're trying to do. We want to assess the people. We want to assess the skill sets. Because a lot of times when I go into companies and I help them redo their sales and get sales growth, many times they have people in sales that really don't have the DNA to be in sales, right? And they're frustrated with those people because, they're really good people. They can speak to people. They're very good. Yeah, that's a great inside sales role, or a role that, is geared, maybe even customer service that sells. But if they don't have the will to go out and actually draw the business in, and they've got all these fears around there because they were taught, whatever, you're not supposed to interrupt somebody's son, that's rude. And, and then companies like make 100 cold calls a day, and they're trying to serve mom and dad and at the same time serve the company. There's going to be this duality pulling at them. So once we do the assessment, then what we do is we build the growth plan based on the objectives from there. We look at the objectives. We go, are these still the same objectives? Yes. Okay, great. No. Okay, let's change this one. And it's okay to change, folks. It's all right, because a lot of times those changes actually turn out better. Now, I don't know if that's universal energy, surrounding people or not, Dan, but I do know that a lot of times, change is good. And, as long as it's not radical and destructive change. So once we have all of that and we know the objectives, then we build a growth plan on that. And then we start assigning this growth plan to people who have committed to growing with us. And that's pretty much the path, except for one more thing. Somebody's got to be accountable to holding people accountable. And that's usually the CEO of the company or the forerunner of the division or something. And they must measure on a regular basis the progress. They must, on a consistent basis, not once a month or once a week, must be coaching their people through and helping them cross those bridges of fear. And they must hold them accountable to what is agreed upon. And then they have to hold themselves accountable too. The worst thing that leaders can do is say, oh, well, you do that, but I'm not going to do that, even though I promised I was going to do that. Right? Because then people look and go, well, the fearless leader's not doing it, so why do we have to do it? Right? And it starts creating these emotional frames from the past being pulled into the present. So that's kind of the steps that I bring people through when I work with them. And that's kind of the steps that people can emulate to bring their people through on their own.
Makes so much sense. Thank you. I actually recommend a scorecard for people to put all those in and break them down into small bite-sized chunks. And I forgot to mention a minute ago, one of the things I try to help brands do, Doug, is build a community outside of traditional retail where they can develop that relationship so they can innovate based upon what people want. Do you want banana? Do you want chocolate? And then build that product according to what their community wants. So great information. I really appreciate that. What other parting thoughts do you have, or resources would you have that you would, or what things have we not talked about that you would like to include in this discussion?
Well, I would challenge anybody in 2021, since we're in the new part of the year, to, put 6 new ways in to get business. Like, institute over the next 12 months in your business, or 6 to 12 months, 1 or 2 new ways, one way every month or every other month. And 2021 is about massive prospecting. A lot of people have been burying their head in the sand, and the competition is down at this point. So the people who massively prospect are going to be recognized as top of mind. And again, this is not our first challenge in life with what's happened in 2020. I mean, we had 9/11, we had SARS, MERS, AIDS, different things, right? The Gulf War, I was a part of that. So, that changed my life around. And so, again, live in ambiguity, right? But put in the prospecting, the massive prospecting into your business in 2021. And then part of that is also building, like you said, go outside the community, right? Build an agency, build a base of 1099 salespeople that want to sell for you because they can make money doing it, and you get the leverage of having the outside community bring in all kinds of new ideas and new business. So, but I would go back to, massive prospecting, and remember, building an agency program is usually a longer term play. So when I'm talking about marketing or prospecting, try shorter term things, right? And then you can have 1 long or 2 long in the 6, right? Because you want some success. And the third thing I would tell people is look at the current assets they already have and see what they can monetize within those assets. In other words, lots of people have past clients, dormant clients, people who are not doing business with one another right at this moment, but they have a familiarity or trust already built in. Go back to those people and start generating new conversations, which will lead to new business. You'd be surprised, not you, Dan, but others would be surprised if they just focused on this massive prospecting. They'll fare a lot better in 2021 than they ever would have.
Well, I think fear is a gift, personally, and from my perspective. And the idea behind that is that you are given these gifts, and if you can overcome that and grow from it, then that gets you in a position where you can rise to even greater challenges. So I could not agree with you more. Thank you. By the way, do you still love your brother? Just kidding.
Yeah. He and I still talk. It's, we still have spirited. He's 9 years older than I am, so we still have some spirited, because he's like, I'm the big brother, you're the little brother, and I'm like, you're the older brother, I'm the younger brother, right?
There you go. You show him who's boss. Just kidding. Well, the fact that
sometimes, yeah,
that's always good. Yeah, talking about kids and where these fears are learned from, but great analogy. I really appreciate it. Any last thoughts you want to offer? Again, this is great information, and again, I cannot thank you enough for making time, and then for having Jacqueline reach out to me.
Oh, you're so welcome. Can I plug my book?
Please do. Yes,
So So, shameless promotion, right?
No, no, no.
So,
That's what this is about. The bottom line is I want this to be of value, and you've got so many great ideas. So please share.
so I wrote a book in 2019 called Win-Win Selling, and the subtitle was Unlocking Your Power of Profitability by Resolving Objections. But it's really on and around how do you communicate better? Because, salespeople, a lot of times they run into challenges, owners who are selling, anybody who's, yeah, I mean, husband, wife, they run into challenges all the time. A lot of times this is from triggers that people don't even realize. So I wrote a book all on the psychology and the philosophy of how do these triggers form and how do they form and manifest themselves into objections. And then what are some, I'll call them formulas, not, that people can use, that they can weave in and out and use parts of these things to diffuse the fear, to diffuse the discomfort, to come to a win-win play from one another. So it's called Win-Win Selling, Unlocking Your Power for Profitability by Resolving Objections. You can get that on Amazon. You can go to winwinsellingbook.com. You can get it there. We'll do a free shipping and handling. You get the free book, but just pay the shipping and handling. And then if people want to, get a hold of me, they can go to www.businesssuccessfactors.com or send me an email at doug@businesssuccessfactors.com. A lot of people like to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's Doug Brown 1234. And if they have some questions or whatever, feel free to pose them. I'll be happy to answer them.
You've got such a wealth of information. Thank you. And more importantly, you're able to contextualize it in a way where people can understand it. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Again, a huge fan of Anthony Robbins, Brian Tracy, Mark Hopkins, all of those big names, Zig Ziglar, etc. And a lot of times those people, when they're talking to us, say, oh yeah, this is a piece of cake. But they don't really go through that. How do you make it personal? How do you understand the basics? How do you, like you said, stair steps? So thank you for going through that. And again, thank you for your time.
I appreciate that. I really do, Dan. One of the reasons I think that happens is because people, when they're young, they say to the parents, well, why can't I do this? And the parent will come back and say, because I said so. Right?
True.
And so what ends up happening is it stifles creativity within the child to ask questions like, okay, what can I do to achieve this? Right. So that's one of the reasons I do what I do, because I was told that a lot when I was young. Yep, I'm the parent, you're the child, this is what's expected of you, and here's the role. And I would always ask the question, but this makes no sense. So how can we get around this, right? And so what I ended up doing is everything that I teach go into, I look at how does it form? Why does it happen? And then we teach that in addition to the actual practical, tactical play. So it's strategic and tactical. So I appreciate you recognizing that, and I appreciate you having me on. I really do. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Look forward to our next conversation.
All right. Thanks.